Greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's Reddit series video from the subreddit HFY called Glintstone Chapter 18 Hand of War, written by some guy named Ted. The link to the original is down below, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. I caught up to Clint, sucking in the air. He had run back to Susan at a much faster pace than I could. He sat in the captain's chair, waiting for me to get in. As soon as I stumbled into the bay, he shut the door, and Susan shot into space. I lay on the floor, trying to catch my breath. When I finally did, I dragged myself into the co-pilot's chair and looked at Clint. "All right," I said. "You need to tell me 3 things. What the hell happened in there? Where are we going? And why?" Clint chuckled. He was in a very good mood, which was to be understood. It wasn't every day that you lost an arm and then got it back. He raised his hand and then waved it in the air. It looked very odd, not just the fact that he had a metal arm, but that it was much larger than the rest of him, designed for a being with much longer arms. It extended a good 3 inches past where it should have, and 3 fingers the same length were different from Clint's normal 4 of the varying sizes. "What happened is I was made whole." I gave him a look and said a great many things, not the least of which was I had thought very little of his attempt at humour. He had the good graces to look sheepish. "They led me into a room and they gave me an arm. I can't describe it better than that. They gave me some kind of drug and they attached the arm to my stump. I don't know much more than that. What can I tell you is the arm works. They explained to me when I asked. The arm is very complex. The outside is comprised of some sort of alloy that I can't identify, but it seems rather tough. Inside of the skin is a perfect representation of the insides of a Randak arm. All the muscles, nerves, tendons, bones. It's a perfect copy, right down to the smallest fragments, but made of metal. The amount of work and time that would require is almost mind-boggling to consider, except I know how they did it. The Randak are one of the few species in the galaxy who have advanced science of nanomachines far enough for most anything. The Randak inject living tissue and nanites, and then they take the recording of how the tissue is formed, right down to the last molecule. The nanites exit the body, and they construct a replica out of metal. This is how the arm was made. In order to attach the arms to a body, there must be a connector. This is formed in the presence of a metal cap at the end of the stump. He pushed his sleeve back and I could see the dull grey line at the base of the metal hand where the metal skin met skin. This is fused to the bone and muscle using nanites. The connection is strong enough that you would rip the arm out of the shoulder before you pull the metal off. The nanites are that well fused. They're versatile little buggers. The arm is attached to the cap, again, using nanites. The nanites in the arm and the cap fuse together and make a solid piece. But that's not the amazing part. Using the metal nerves the nanites constructed earlier, the nanites can send messages to and from the brain using real nerves as the constructed ones. That is the truly remarkable feat of the engineering and science. I would agree. It sounded close to magic, but there were still several questions that came to mind when he gave me that explanation. Well, what powers it? I mean, nanites are little machines, surely they need power. The nanites power themselves, but yes, it does need more power. It runs off a small power cell implanted where the bones would be in the forearm, and the arm is made of metal, so it doesn't need support. If the arm is formed from nanites, couldn't it be told to do different things, like change shape? No, when the nanites form, they're locked into place permanently. The tendons and things can move, but they are designed to do that. But I guess if you coded them right, they could, He trailed off, lost in thought. Normally, I would have wondered what he was thinking about, but I had more pressing matters. He had answered my first question, but he had yet to answer my other 2. So, where are we going and why are we going there? I glanced at the display and I read that Susan was traveling at 4 times warp speed, the fastest she could go into warp. The only other time that she had gone that fast had been when I was racing to get Clint to the hospital after I cut off his arm. And why are we going so fast? Clint jerked out of his deep thoughts. Huh? Oh, we're going to Narcoris, the open market. The open market was just that, an open market. They could buy anything that you wanted there, if you could find it. And I mean everything. You name it, they have it. There are a few things that I need to pick up for my arm. I didn't know what he meant by that. Isn't your arm already? Well, an arm. It's already put together. What would you need it for it? Clint laughed, a quiet, quick laugh. He lifted up his arm and waved it. Do you see this? It's not even close to what I need. I mean, yes, I have an arm and I could make do if I had to. But what I want is a human arm. And I mentioned this to the Randex, said that I could design myself a better arm. They said that if I wished I could construct anything I desired. They said that I was a Randex now, whatever that means. So I was going to Narcoris to get some supplies that they didn't have in Skilvolka. We have to go so fast because they said that I had to be back by the 3rd day of celebration, which is in 2 days. My question satisfied, I sat back in my chair and prepared for a long voyage. Clint sat in his chair exploring the new hand that he was given. We landed on Narcoris and Clint picked up a few things, a block of heavy metal, some components that I had no idea what they did, and a small object that he kept in a locked box. On our trip to Narcoris, he had the good sense to keep his arm hidden, which forced me to have all the heavy lifting. He collected his items and flew back to Skilvolka just as fast as we had left. We walked down the odd stone and metal pavement, heading towards the Temple of Metal, carrying our haul from Narcoris. The city was still a strange feeling, the one that made my skin crawl. I was no closer to discovering what was causing that feeling than the first time I had wandered down the street. We climbed up the stairs in the tower, and Clint pressed his hand into the Randak one, into the tower door. It opened before his touch, and we walked in. The 3 Randaks stood in a strange room with a dull metal door, waiting for Clint. As before, I was forced to wait outside as Clint was ushered in. This time, I did not complain. The Randak gave me a shiver to my spine, one that would not leave me be. I waited in the room for a great long time. I slept twice during that time. The second time I awoke to a plate of steaming, undefinable meat. I was hungry enough to eat it without question. I was dozing off for the 3rd time when the door opened and Clint walked out. He stood in front of me, shirtless, covered in sweat. I could tell that he was tired, but he was exhilarated. It was easy to see why. His hand was entirely different this time. Instead of an awkward, smooth, disproportioned Randak arm that he had before, now he had an arm that fit him. This arm was different from the Randak arm as night was today. This arm was thick and powerful, and the arm looked like it belonged to Clint, as if it were a natural extension of his body instead of just a hand. This new hand was an arm extending all the way up Clint's arm, standing at his upper bicep and encasing his entire arm below that. The metal sleeve formed around Clint's existing arm into a second skin. I could see little veins beneath the skin pulsing. The sleeve continued down his arm until it reached a point where Clint's real arm ended. Up until that point, it had been a second skin formed to Clint's own. After the stump, the metal changed. Instead of looking like skin, the arm looked like a muscular under the skin, rigid and corded. The metal strands were changing sizes, wrapping around each other in such a way that it made it difficult for my eyes to follow. Despite this peculiar design, the corded muscle looked much better than the strange, abnormal smoothness of the Randak arm. The hand was perfect reflection of Clint's right hand, the flesh and blood hand. He must have used nanites to recover the shape of his hand and then reflected it to the left hand. It was much better than the long 3-fingered hand of the Randak. His hand was also not constructed of bright, shiny metal of the Randaks. The arm was a dull grey that seemed to absorb the light instead of reflect it. Clint noticed me staring and smiled with pride. He raised his hand and clenched it into a fist. Just that simple motion, and I could see a vast improvement in the Randak design. "What did you do to it?" I asked, knowing that was what he wanted me to do. Clint always liked to explain his new inventions. "I took the basic design, and I added a few features," he said. "For one, I built it out of titanium graphite alloy." I blinked. That was one of the strongest materials in the galaxy. It could survive a direct nuclear attack. That was the heavy block of metal that you carried on Narcoris. The hand was unbreakable and ridiculously strong. because the muscles are formed of the alloy as well. The strength level is off the charts. That's why I increased the length up to my shoulder. This way, I can lift more. I replaced the old power cell that they had with a new nuclear-powered one, right here. He tapped his arm at the center of his forearm. It was a good thing that the titanium graphite alloy could survive nuclear explosion. Clint had a mini nuke in his arm. This thing gives the arm the edge that it never had before. With this much power, I found it capable of so much more. For instance, he put his hand out in front of him and held out his fingers, spread wide. He seemed to concentrate, and blades shot out from the ends of his fingers, the razor sharp and 8 inches long. "That's not all," he said, positively giddy with excitement. He concentrated again, and the blades glowed blue. They were plasma cutters. That seemed ironic that Clint had lost an arm to a plasma cutter, and now he had a hand made of them. This was insane. With this, Clint could be nearly unstoppable. He had been deadly enough without the knives attached to his fingers. I stared in amazement. "Is there anything else I can do?" I asked Clint. He raised an eyebrow and curled his hand into a fist, and then spun a punch at the metal wall behind him. The fist sank into the metal, up to the wrist. "Are you finding the new form to be acceptable, Randak?" The voice came from the open door of the wall. The 3 metal beings walked out, metal bodies pinging with movement. "Oh, yes," Clint said. "I noticed something. Why do you call him Randak? He is not one of your species." The medium-height being laughed, a strange sound and not pleasant one. "Randak is not our species." "What do you mean? You are natives to Skavalka, aren't you?" I asked, confused. "Randak is not our species. Randak means chosen, chosen to receive Anaki's love. It is a great honor to be a Randak. Hardly anyone is." Something clicked into place. I knew why the city had made my skin crawl. It was an enormous city, big enough to hold millions of beings, yet there were only 3 that had been seen. Everyone else was gone. "Where is everyone else in the city?" I asked, afraid to hear the answer. "They were not chosen. They were refused to our Lord's love. They perished." Clint finally caught on what was being said. "You mean that everyone in the city tried to make themselves like you and they died?" "Everyone on this planet," said the tallest Randak in the calmest voice that I'd ever heard. "They were all refused his love." "When did this happen?" I asked. The shortest being looked at the other 2 and said, "Perhaps 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. We lost count." That was disturbing. The Randak had been converted to metal, and the rest of the population had tried to become like them and failed and died. "What makes someone chosen?" I asked. "Nanites," growled Clint, who seemed to have just come to the planet-shattering discovery. "You can only survive the process if you have nanites in you." He looked at the Randak. "But you knew that. You knew why beings died when they came here and asked for metal limbs. You knew, and you could have saved them, but you let them die." "They were not to have our Lord's love. Only those blessed with his mark may survive the passage." "Where did the nanites come from?" I asked, stunned by this revelation. These beings had not created the science. It was given to them. "Anarchy. Beings who he just chosen for his own receive his mark, and they stay here to worship him, as you must," said the tallest being, looking at Clint. "You must become fully Randak, and you will join us in your worship." His voice turned threatening and absolute. Clint backed away. "There is no way in hell that I am going to become a walking computer," he said, raising his fist. "You have no say in the matter," said the short Randak, stepping forward. "You have been chosen by him, and you will serve." He lunged at Clint, moving with a surprising speed, grabbing for Clint's arm. Clint danced out of the way and smashed his left arm down into the Randak's back, forcing it to the floor. It sprang back up without a sign that it had been hit with enough force to level a building. "I gave you a warning shot," Clint said. "Let we walk out of here and I'll forget this whole thing. I owe you that much for this." He raised his metal arm. "But if you try again, you will be worshipping your god from the afterlife." "He is your god as well," said the tallest. "You will worship him." He jumped at Clint, arms outstretched. Clint swung his metal arm across his body, and blue blades erupted from his fingers. They sheared through the Randek's metal arm with as much trouble as through flesh. The Randek stared in shock at his missing arm. Clint's second swipe took off his head, and he stopped staring. "Anyone else?" Clint snarled. With a word, the two other Randek leapt at Clint. He made short work of them as well. Metal pieces scattered across the floor. All that remained was a vile religion. Clint turned and walked out of the room. I stared for a bit longer at the remains of the once immortal beings and followed him out of the room, back to Susan. When Clint returned to the galaxy, his metal arm drew great attention, but it was the only one of its kind, and Clintstone was a famous being. It became the source of Clint's nickname, the one that sent armies fleeing in terror. The War Fist was coming. The Hand of War was attacking. These words would soon strike fear into soldiers and generals of the Squirn armies. But that does not happen for a while. End of chapter. I hope that you enjoyed, and if you did, please consider subscribing. If you wish to support the author, there is a link to the original story, so pop over there and give him your support. If you wish to support this channel, however, there are a few ways to do so. The best and easiest would be to share this video with other people, as well as liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. All of these things tell the algorithm that this channel is at least vaguely interesting, and that may share it with other people. If you wish to support the channel in some other manner, watching my other videos would also help tremendously. Or, if you really like, there is a link down below to leave a tip or to join the Patreon. Any and all support is very much appreciated. And I hope that you all have a good one until the next time, and I'll see you then. Cheers.